Every day she's there, I say, please share my umbrella. Bus stop, bus go, she stays, love grows under my umbrella.
Welcome to the Customer Experience Bus. I'm your driver, Joseph Michelli, and today I'm pleased to be joined by someone who will navigate us to connect purpose, people, and performance. Alan Williams is the Managing Director of Service Brand Global and has authored or co-authored the 31 Practices, My 31 Practices, The Values Economy, and most recently, Supercharging Customer Experience. Alan helps leaders turn their organization's values into daily behaviors that drive culture, elevate the customer experience, and deliver sustained success. And today's journey will help us release the power of values, both personally and organizationally, to fuel authentic service and lasting performance. Alan, welcome on the CX Bus. It's great to have you. And since I value honoring people's time, let's dive in. Alan, in the book, The Service Economy, you talk about delivering purpose-driven service for sustained performance. What does purpose-driven service mean in today's business climate, and why is it so important now?
Thanks, Joseph. Great to be here. And purpose-driven service is really about putting service in context. So how often have we heard people talking about, oh, we want to deliver great service, but where's it rooted? You know, there's no point in delivering great service unless there's a connection to something else. And a lot of the feedback that I get about the work that I do is that it is led by the brand identity, which includes the purpose and values of the organization. Because if you don't do that and inform all of the decisions you make about your service design, then you're leaving something on the table. So that's what I mean by purpose-led service.
It seems to me that people really do have a difficult time figuring out how to translate values into daily behaviors. You spend a lot of time talking about practices, and in 31 Practices, you offer methods really for making values real. Let's talk a little bit about how people can do that, and more importantly, what's the benefit of doing this?
Well, let's talk about the other side of the coin first. What's the disbenefit of not doing it? You know, how many times have you been into an organization, and these days it might be that the values are etched into the wall behind the reception desk, right? And yet when you say to the person that checks you in, oh, I see that those are your values up there on the wall, what does that mean to you in your day-to-day work? And they kind of glaze over and look at you blankly. So that's the problem. You know, if you're going to say that you stand for something, then the people that represent you really need to be behaving accordingly. And unless you translate those values into specific concrete behaviors, that's just not going to happen.
So leaders are in different parts of their journey, right? In terms of how they get values into their organization. How do you see the role of leadership evolving when it comes to embedding values into an organization so that it has tangible impact?
That's a great question, Joseph, because I think we're at some kind of inflection point at the moment where leadership used to be about controlling people and telling them what to do and knowing what needed to be done. And now we live in an environment and operate in an environment where most of the time we don't know what's going to happen next. And so the leader's job really is one of empowering the people in the organization, making them understand where the organization is going, and trusting in them to make the right decisions in line with the values of the organization. Because when you think about the math, right, if you're thinking about an organization of, say, hundreds or thousands of employees, it's insane to think that the guy at the top is going to be able to do everything. And so you really have to take a different approach where you're equipping everybody in the organization to be working towards where the organization is going. The way to do that, in my opinion, is to be really clear about your values, what that means in practice, and then learning as you go.
So you've written these two compatible books, but focus on different components, right? My 31 Practices and the 31 Practices. What's the relationship between one's personal values and organizational values, and how does one bring their values to work, and how does the values of the organization, not interfere with an individual's own sense of values? How do you rectify all this together?
Yeah, and that's changing too, right? Because it used to be like when I was growing up in the corporate world, pretty much your private life was separated from your work life, and that was the way people lived their lives. Whereas now it's a lot more blurred, and so it's a great question. I'll just give you a bit of background by way of interest. So I created the 31 practices approach first for organizations, and this was inspired actually by the Daily Basics program that Ritz-Carlton and Marriott use, which is a set of service-based behaviors. And one that I remember was, when you're within 10 feet of a guest, you acknowledge them. And I recognized the power of that conscious daily practice. And then when I started to get interested in values and realized that there was this huge gap between what people or organizations said their values were and what was actually happening, I thought, oh, this conscious daily practice approach would be a great way to do it. And the reason, if you hadn't twigged already, that it's called the 31 practices is because there's no more than 31 days in a month. So I created that, and it worked really, really well. And it's, by the way, it's never failed, apart from when management move on in the middle of a program. And then I was sat in my office one day thinking, I wonder how applicable this is to our personal lives, because we live in a world that's very, very busy. And it's kind of easy to fall into just reacting and responding to what's going on around you. And if you do that, you can pretty quickly be taken off course. And the metaphor that I think of is like we're like a boat in the ocean, right? And you can either just be tossed around on the waves and almost, close your eyes, cross your fingers, and hope that you're going to be okay. Or you can be more intentional and you can decide what's important to you and you can consciously behave in that way. So navigating your point, taking into account the fact that waves will come, it's not that we're going to be on a mirror, but heading in a certain direction. So that's what led me to create my 31 practices. And the relationship between the two, obviously, perhaps, it's much better when the two can be closely aligned, but I'm not an advocate of saying that they have to be absolutely the same, because it's the real world. And so as long as you've got alignment and understanding of the similarities and the differences, then I think that that's a good start in terms of understanding the relationship between organizational and personal values.
So I've written a lot about culture and a lot about values, including the Ritz-Carlton, a book about their values and those daily behaviors of which you speak. One of the things I find is that people conflate what culture or values means. People have it be everything and nothing all at the same time. So I think it is helpful to try to take values out of this ethereal sort of foo-foo sort of place where many leaders just tamp it down and put it into something that is more tangible, which is really your work. That's like your career mission. Beyond that, though, we have to kind of show some ROI on this values-based behavior. So maybe you can help me understand, if you're going into organizations and you're going to consult with them about how to translate these values into actions, how you justify any investment at all in the values structure, the behavioral values action that you do.
Yeah, and I agree with you that in many cases values are left far too abstract and they're not measured in terms of the improvement. So I use something called a core values score survey, which uses Net Promoter Score, and basically it asks the question of multiple different stakeholders of an organization on a scale of 1 to 10. To what degree do you think the value of X is being lived by organization, whatever it is? And so you get the hard data from that question. And then there's a follow-up which says, what behaviors do you see that reinforce this value or detract from this value? So then you get the really juicy subjective stuff as well. And the whole point around values is that once you make it concrete, you can have a legitimate conversation, whereas otherwise you're not able to do that. And the great thing about 31 Practices, I'm a naturally positive person, so I tend to go to, recognizing the behaviors that you want to see in your organization, but actually there is another side to the coin. So let's just imagine a scenario where an organization has the value of excellence. And let's just imagine that one of the daily practices is meticulous attention to cleanliness and tidiness. That you can see the relationship between the two, right? So then let's say it's a hotel. You mentioned Ritz-Carlton, and imagine that you're a supervisor or a senior leader and you're walking around the hotel, and I work in the housekeeping department, and the area that I'm in, you spot, let's say, a broken paper cup behind the door. Now you can say to me, Alan, look what I just spotted here. And if you remember, what's today's practice? And I would say to you, oh yeah, Joseph, it's about meticulous attention to cleanliness and tidiness. Well, that's, to be honest, disappointing, Alan, because I'm in your area and it's the focus for us all today. And yet, how's that happen? And I'm like, I'm not taking that personally. It's not Joseph having a go at Alan. The conversation is perfectly legitimized because that is the practice and the focus for today. And my only real response can be, I'm really sorry about that, and I'm going to do better next time. So I think of it as being an iron fist in a velvet glove, the 31 practices, used for the positive, but also that harder edge as well.
Yeah, and in the Ritz-Carlton, closest service value to that is I am responsible for creating environments of uncompromising cleanliness, right? I am responsible for creating an environment, not just making this moment clean. And with that comes all that opportunity to what does that look like behaviorally? When can I coach to it? When can I coach up? If a leader walks by something that was discarded and they don't pick it up, it's a really lovely thing. And it goes to really kind of on the next question that comes with a lot of this, which is, you talk in the context of Service Brand Global and the work that you do, you talk a lot about aligning all these things. Like you have to have the culture aligned with the values, and the values have to be aligned with the customer experience. And this is really kind of like the lane I live in. So I would love to understand, how do these things become disconnected? How is it that they're not aligned intuitively? And then what would one do about it in order to try to bring these things back into alignment?
Yeah. So actually, again, talking about Ritz-Carlton, my first career was commercial hospitality management. So I ran five-star hotels and conference centers. And what I didn't realize at the time was that I was learning so much about alignment, because in a good hotel, there's a general manager or managing director, and they are responsible. The buck stops with them for everything. And that's the key. Whereas when I moved out of hospitality and into other sectors, I realized that the organization structure was all important, and management by function was the way things were done. And actually, there wasn't very much respect for general management. Or the functions were allowed to kind of just get on, scrabble amongst themselves for limited resources. And to take the three fundamental pillars of the service brand approach that I use, you've got brand identity, employee engagement, and customer experience. And what the approach says is that those three need to be strategically aligned and then executed in a coordinated fashion. Now, in many organizations, brand identity is owned by marketing, employee engagement is owned by human resources, customer experience is delivered by operations. The three quite often devise their own unilateral strategies, don't talk to each other, and then they're all shocked when it doesn't work. So the answer, like you mentioned, is alignment. That's the key. And let me just share a story with you. It's from the automotive sector. I was doing a pretty big project, rolling out 400 new showrooms around the world. And in their marketing department, they used the phrase inspired performance for their premium range. All well and good. I attended some sales training, and the trainer kept going on about service excellence. That's what we're striving for, service excellence. So at one of the breaks, I just said to him, really curious about the language that you use, because language sets the tone. And I wonder whether anybody's ever considered using phraseology like inspired service instead of service excellence. And he said, well, why do you make a suggestion like that? And I said, well, then it would be aligned with what marketing say, because they talk about inspired performance. So that's what I was thinking. And this guy put his hand on my forearm in a pretty patronizing way. And he said, yeah, but Alan, that's marketing. And this is sales, to justify it.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Yeah, I mean, I think people, you can see how people disconnect from, say, the power of language to inspire people to deliver that service excellence, right? As opposed to focusing on some abstract concept. Let's talk about your most recent book, because I think in it, the Supercharging Customer Experience, you focus a lot, I think, on the power of values and value-based cultures in executing. So I would really like to understand, what principle do you think gets overlooked in customer experience, translating values into customer experience, and just generally driving better experiences? What's the principle you think is most overlooked in that space?
Intrinsic motivation of employees in front of the customer. So again, when I was growing up in the hospitality sector, there was a huge reliance on centralized operating manuals, to tell everybody what to do. And that's why people did it. And that's not the best way. And there's a couple of stories, actually, one from hotels, one from the banking sector. So I was in my office one morning, got a call from reception. It was around about 7:45, something like that. And a guest would like to see you. They're just checking out. They'd like to see you. So I'm thinking, okay, is this going to be a good start to the day or not such a good start to the day? Went to see this guy, and he said, I just need to share with you my experience last night when I checked in. And he said, I arrived pretty late. It was about 11 o'clock. I'd driven an hour and a half from my home. And as I was parking the car, I realized that my suit that I was going to wear at an important meeting the next day, this morning, was still hanging on the door frame at home. So he said, I got to the hotel. It was pretty quiet. There was nobody around because it was so late. There was a young man who was the night porter who dealt with my registration. And while I was filling in the form, I just said to him, I've been really stupid. I've left my suit at home. I've got this really important meeting tomorrow. And then he said, and what happened next really just blew me away, because he looked me up and down, this young man, and he said, hey, I live just 5 minutes down the road. Do you want to borrow a suit? And then he said to me, how do you get your people to do that? And I just explained that, we focused a lot on the reason why we're here is to make people feel good and look after them and all of the rest of it. And then all of the technical stuff, like filling in the registration form and doing the stuff on the computer, that has to happen, yeah, sure, but it's not the main reason that you're here. And a similar story in a banking environment, we were expecting a VIP. We had photo cards, so this guy's photo card was already produced. We had a standard in place that was the receptionist, because they knew the schedule of guests, tried to introduce them first. So it would be, welcome, Mr. Michelli, we're expecting you. And most of the time you'd get it right and it would be very impressive. So that happened. But what we hadn't bargained for was that this guy had brought his terrier dog with him. So the receptionist presented his photocard to him. And then she said, oh, and could you just lift up the dog in front of the camera, please? And what's his name? Produced the name badge for him.
How wonderful. Yeah.
And the guy went
That's personal, even if it's doggable. I'm not sure if that's yeah.
And the guy went into the meeting room. He used expletives, which I won't use on here, but he explained that that was the best welcome that he had experienced anywhere anywhere in the world. And the
Well,
meeting.
most of the people who listen to this and watch the video of this particular segment will be on the CX bus. They're already committed to the journey of delivering great customer experiences that drive loyalty and repeat business. But they're often overwhelmed, and particularly if they're in a cultural transformation journey where they're trying to take an organization that maybe wasn't born like the one you described or the two you described, but really have maybe come from a more product focused mindset. So how does a leader who's trying to take this journey to create great customer experiences deal with cultural transformation? And maybe even better yet, because we only have a limited amount of time now, if they were to go out and try one thing this week, what would that one thing be?
Yeah. So big picture, vision and values, and then positive reinforcement. As a starting point, find the people who are doing what you want them to do and doing it now, and praise them and celebrate them and make everybody know that that's what you want to happen. There's a risk sometimes for leaders when they're in a situation that needs a lot of improvement to focus on what's wrong. And actually, it sounds counterintuitive maybe, but I tend not to focus too much on what's wrong. Starve it, don't give it oxygen, and really give the oxygen to what is happening that's right in the organization. And then also depersonalize it when it is wrong. You know, most people don't go to work to screw things up. And so you need to find out what went wrong and why, and not blame people for it.
Wow, Alan, this has just been a remarkable conversation. I think it's chock full of things that people can think about in terms of making this thing that we call customer experience not so amorphous and really translating it into something that really changes the way they do business. So thank you first and foremost for the insightful conversation and sharing your wisdom and your real world examples in action. Customer experience bus passengers, I hope today's episode does for you what it did for me. It inspired me to think more deeply about how our personal and organizational values show up daily and how they should become the foundation of performance. Alan's books include The Values Economy, Supercharging Customer Experience, and The 31 Practices. They can be found on Amazon and at servicebrandglobal.com. You'll also find links in the show notes. I highly recommend that you check them out. And while you're at it, if you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, share, and follow this podcast and video series. Let's keep the bus rolling and the conversation going about how purpose and practice create better experiences for employees, customers, and communities. Thanks again, Alan, and thanks to you for hopping on the customer experience bus.